Chapter 2. Getting Along, Getting Ahead. If Ben can thrive in prison, we can hope to thrive too. There can't be many of us who find ourselves as lacking in agency and opportunity as he did. How easy it should be. Open the door, step out of it, and there it is, the world in all its hustle and wonder. The story we're often told is that with sufficient application of self-belief and effort, we can do anything we want, be whoever we want. But it's not so easy. The world isn't as it seems. On the other side of that door, you won't find a simple pathway to happiness that you can march up heroically for 7 or 8 decades. Everyone out there is playing a game. That game has its own hidden rules, traps and shortcuts. And yet almost nobody alive is fully conscious of its form, despite being active daily participants. So let's attempt to wake ourselves up to the great game. Let's try to define more precisely what human life is and what it's trying to be. Humans are a species of great ape. We survive by belonging to highly cooperative groups that share labour. We've been living in settled communities for around 500 generations. But we existed in mobile hunter-gatherer bands for far longer than this, at least 100,000 generations. Our brains remain programmed for this style of life. We are today as we've always been, tribal. We have instincts that compel us to seek connection with coalitions of others. Once we've been accepted into a group, we strive to achieve their approval and acclaim. If we're to flourish, this approval and acclaim is critical. Researchers find that in the kinds of pre-modern communities our brains evolved in, social status is a universal cue to the control of resources, writes psychologist Professor David Buss. Along with status comes better food, more abundant territory, superior healthcare. It leads to greater access to preferred mates and bestows on children social opportunities that youngsters in lower-ranking families miss out on. When researchers analysed 186 pre-modern societies around the world, they found men of higher status invariably had greater wealth and more wives and provided better nourishment for their children. This was, and remains, the secret of maximising our capacity for survival and reproduction. The higher we rise, the more likely we are to live, love and procreate. It's the essence of human thriving. It's the status game. Evolution has programmed us to seek groups to join and then strive for rank within them. But, especially in the modern era, we're not limited to one group. For those of us not in prison, a typical life involves the playing of multiple games. Wherever we connect with like-minded others, the game will be on. At work, online, on the sports field, at the volunteer centre, in the club, park or activist collective, even at home. The minimum requirement for play is connection. Before we can be rewarded with status, we must first be accepted into the group as a player. Psychologists find that simply connecting with others and feeling accepted by them can be profoundly good for us. But equally revealing is how our minds and bodies react when we fail to connect. A wide range of research finds people with depression tend to belong to far fewer groups than the rest of the population. Studies across time suggest the more a depressed person identifies with their group, the more of their own sense of self they invest in it, the more their symptoms lift. Failure to connect can even make us physically ill. Numerous studies find it's possible to predict mortality by observing the extent to which someone has meaningful contact with others. One survey of nearly 7,000 residents of Alameda County in California found the people most likely to survive to old age were those with solid face-to-face relationships, writes psychologist Susan Pinker. Their social relationships, or lack of them, predicted mortality independently of how healthy